Welcome to Company Secrets, the Nutcracker Paradox. I'm your host, Jared Redick. This season, we are diving into the most enduring, profitable, and beloved ballet in the world, the Nutcracker. Every year, millions watch it. But how are today's choreographers and artistic leaders handling its complex history and its future? This is season 2. Let's get started. Today I'm joined by Ethan Stiefel, star of Stage and Screen and longtime principal dancer at American Ballet Theater. Ethan and I first met and were classmates at Baryshnikov's School of Classical Ballet at ABT back in the 90s, not long before he joined New York City Ballet at 16. He then moved to ABT as a principal in 1997, performing every major role in the classical repertory. In 2000, he starred in Center Stage, the film that made ballet accessible to a generation. And since then, he's served in multiple leadership roles, including as artistic director of the Royal New Zealand Ballet and dean of the School of Dance at the University of North Carolina School of the Arts. In 2009, he choreographed a new Nutcracker for UNCSA, and today we're digging into all things Nutcracker, its paradoxes, its power, and what it means for ballet's future. Welcome, Ethan.
Thank you.
You've danced Nutcracker at New York City Ballet, ABT, and beyond, as well as choreographing your own version. When you think about its place in ballet today, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Love, hate?
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, to a certain degree. Certainly, now I'm nearly 53, and I think my first experience was when I was 9, and it's changed and evolved in terms of, my thoughts on it. But all kidding aside, I would say that quintessential and timeless has to be two of the words that jump into my mind right away as well.
At the peak of your Nutcrackering, how many shows do you think you did in one season?
You know, it was two separate occasions. Certainly dancing with the New York City Ballet, I would say that set the bar in terms of the number of shows. And then there was one year where actually I was just really fortunate that between American Ballet Theater as well as putting together guestings from basically the day after Thanksgiving till January 1st, that would be a solid, 5 weeks? So between those two experiences, I feel like even if I had only those two experiences, I might have been completely fulfilled. Nutcracker and its endless charm and gifts, but those were certainly two more intense performance seasons for me in different ways.
Yeah, no doubt. In Boston, the height of its Nutcrackering up there, I think we did 52 shows one year, which is a lot.
You know, if I was better with math, I would have given you a number, but I can only count up to 8. And I wouldn't know the number of shows. And I think even now, maybe City Ballet does even more. So more power to them.
Yeah. More power to those dancers getting through that long run. So moving on, let's talk about Center Stage a little bit. Actually, it's Nutcracker in relation to Center Stage. So Center Stage is probably your most recognizable work to the general public. The Nutcracker is ballet's most recognizable ballet. Both are entrance points to dance for a broader audience, but are not really reflective as what we think of as ballet as a whole. Do you think that's a problem, or are they exactly the kind of gateways ballet needs?
Well, I think, in terms of their success that you refer to, as well as this idea of a gateway, I think the fact that each of them in their own way really bring kind of legit balletic qualities to life. I mean, certainly Center Stage, which has been good to me, and I'm thankful for that experience on a number of levels. I think how that worked and why it resonated was because I know for a fact, in terms of the director and the producer, that presenting the ballet sequences that were involved in the filming, that they took great care, had great respect and appreciation for what we do. So I feel that those, again, are pretty legit in terms of the dancers' work and also how they filmed it and how they wanted the actual dancing to come across. Now, further to that point then with Center Stage, yes, it's a piece of entertainment. It's a dramatization, a theatrical presentation, but at the same time, in a very broad way, I think it does touch upon certain situations, scenarios, and even personalities. And so because it does have that inherent in terms of its approach, I think that that combination, along with its entertainment value, has made it something that was, as you said, accessible and broadened audiences. On the other hand, if we're talking about the Nutcracker, it has kind of a different life depending upon where you are. Whether in the US, I danced a brand new world premiere production at the age of 19 in Zurich, Switzerland. Then if you're in New Zealand and so on, it kind of has its own life. But if you peel it back in terms of especially what it means, and there's a book I think called Nutcracker Nation, especially what it means to the US and dance companies here, as well as it being such a holiday tradition, it really is a ballet that serves as a gateway. But I think it's, again, going back to that point, it serves as a gateway because it's got the chops.
Yeah.
From the score to it being transcendent and transportive. Is that a word?
Don't be today.
It's been a while since I was a dean, since I was in academia, but, and also then technically what is required, I think that's something that shouldn't be discounted. Again, that combination for both of these things, having some real palpable entertainment value, but an undercurrent of some legitimacy is what makes them remain of interest.
Very well said. I appreciate that. And big shout out to Jennifer Fisher, who I did have on the show for this season, her Nutcracker Nation. That's her book. So
right on. Yeah, I can't remember when I read that. It was probably 15 years ago when I just learned how to read. And so, no, I really did find it fascinating. And that would have been maybe before I had, let's say, refurbished, along with the team, mind you, not just myself exclusively at UNCSA. And yeah, I found it very poignant and powerful in terms of what it means to the U.S. specifically and how that actually differs from experience, at least my personal experiences, and how it's presented or viewed in other places.
That's a great perspective about that. Let's just move on a little bit. Something a little more fun. Every dancer has a Nutcracker horror story, right? Things going wrong on stage, either on stage or backstage. Can you share something from your professional experience?
Yeah, I could share two of them. And I visited my mom, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago, and, she had been going through things that were in the basement. And I just had this then really coincidentally on hand. And now that you asked that, it seemed to be the right time maybe to reveal it, which one of my horror stories is that I actually was on stage in public with, of all bowl cuts, that is in a turtleneck. But I've got to say, in my defense, that the line, the way even then, I mean, just incredible. It was just in my DNA that you could get past the bowl cut. So that was in Wisconsin, in Madison. I think that was the first year of my Nutcracker experience. I was playing Fritz. And
that looks like straight out of Stranger Things, man.
There you go. I'm, retro. I just keep the haircut thing going.
Yeah.
But the other thing, and I don't know what your audience base is and kind of the median age, but something that I remember, which obviously sticks with me to this day, you could call it traumatic, is I don't know if they still do that. Maybe you can tell me, but I had to wear 2 pairs of white tights. It was interesting until like the age of 12 or 13. And maybe that was, just kind of a Midwest thing, our reserved sensibility or whatever. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I just remember even at that age, I was like wearing 2 pairs of like the old knit nylon tights. I was like, this is so uncomfortable. And I couldn't quite figure out, I just did what I was told. I was a good kid in that sense most of the time. But when it came to white tights, they made all of us who were like, youths wear 2 pairs. So I don't know if I'm getting off topic, but in a way, I'm not sure anyone else on your show would have brought either of these things, the bowl cut or 2 pairs of white tights.
2 pairs of white tights seems like cruel and unusual punishment, but 1 pair is bad enough.
Absolutely. But anyways, in general, I have great memories, and it dovetails to that point of it's not just about Nutcracker being a gateway for audience members and broadening, the exposure of dance and ballet in particular, but in terms of what it does for those who are students and aspiring professionals. And I think that what really is truly a beautiful thing is it does change, as I was saying before, and it does evolve. So you find kind of new things and new ways, whether it be doing new roles, whether it be you get involved creatively or directorially. So yeah, it's certainly such an important piece, not just in terms of what it does to open up people's minds and give them a little bit of an education into ballet if they're not familiar, but also then the education it gives one as an artist.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And this is really a great segue to my next question.
I do what I can, man.
You're helping me out here as we move through it. All right. So, you've been both on stage and directed productions from New York to New Zealand. How did working on the different versions impact your production you did here at UNCSA?
The one in Zurich was very interesting because I had just kind of landed there and we started working on it in September. And as I was saying, it has a different kind of value and perspective where you perform Nutcracker from October through May.
Yeah.
Have changed now in certain countries. And I know that in New Zealand, most recently speaking with the artistic director there, Ty, that he's made a new Nutcracker because they're kind of looking at what it has done in terms of really taking hold in the US. That then is something that is entertaining and effective. But that one was pretty wild. And so I came out as a Nutcracker in black velour, a unitard or onesie, but full like balaclava, but diamond encrusted.
Okay.
And so that was the Nutcracker doll. And I had to do a tap dance. And so that
you toe.
No. And I sang once live on stage in West Side Story, and Jerome Robbins said I sounded like Bob Dylan, which I was actually really flattered by. But anyways, and then they like peeled this thing off, and then I became like ballet person. And also the designs were by Mario Botta, who is a world-renowned architect. And so what I could say then, you're like, dude, you're boring us, is that's just leading me up to, with School of the Arts, I was basically retrofitting ideas and let's say trying to refresh, but within sets, costumes, all of that. So I couldn't say that was then, maybe what would be my vision.
Yeah.
If I had the great fortune to build it from the bottom up. But I think that what was important was it needed to be something that would be stimulating and appropriately challenging for the student body.
Yeah.
So that they would be engaged, but again, feel like it was something that was exciting and not like just developmental in a boring way, and using the people and personalities in front of you. So in that way, it was very specific. I think the other thing is, and this would just be my general vibe in terms of Nutcracker and Nutcrackers and ones that I enjoy, although I appreciate all different kinds of Nutcrackers, is that there is really an opportunity to mix different styles in terms of what you're doing, in terms of the absolute classicism, in terms of classical ballet, and feel that's a very important part of, what a ballet company does. But at the same time, School of the Arts, one of the things I love about it is that it has also a contemporary/modern program. And so that I learned a lot, even though I was like the dean in directing, and that I felt, I could draw upon things that were within me growing up watching a lot of musicals on VHS, or maybe even being forced to. That might be another way to put it, growing up. But that you're putting together a real show. And I had fun with that, keeping the sophistication of ballet, but in certain moments, using a real kind of musical theater, pop culture. I think I threw some of the Michael Jackson influence into the Big Mice and so on and so forth. And that those things then are fun. And that's what I think then becomes also really cool for the audience, is that they're like, okay, I don't know if I really understand ballet, but right now in this moment, what I do know is I'm enjoying what I'm seeing. I can relate to the people that I see on the stage. And also then there's certain things that I peppered in there in the various sections that I was, creating, that then draw upon things that the everyday audience could also kind of relate to, and not to pander, but just something that would be fun and festive, because I feel that's the beauty of Nutcracker. It has the sophistication, and it can, and I believe it should in many ways, but at the same time, look, let's put on a show and make sure that people come into that theater and leave, if they have any worries, behind, or keep the smile on their face that they entered the theater with.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. And I had Phil Chan on a little bit ago. Yeah, he was talking about why don't we have like Game of Thrones, the ballet, those kinds of things. And that's really to say what you're discussing is why not pepper in the appropriate moments, Nutcracker, with, popular culture or other ballets as well, where it's appropriate, right? Because there's a lot of latitude creatively that you could interject those things in.
Sure. And I like to use this term maybe too much, but I like to call it like progressive classicism, that you maintain the essence. And it is very special, the ballet technique, and it does take a lot of hard work, like all forms of dance. But if you're talking about ballet, being a ballet company or having a ballet education, that it should be progressive classicism, in essence, maintaining what makes it so unique, and inspiring, and at the same time, keep it moving forward, whether it's the context or the atmosphere or the vocabulary that you mix in there.
I like that term, progressive classicism. I always find myself thinking about what Mr. Balanchine would do, because he was always experimenting throughout his repertory and his choreographic career. I wonder what he would do with dancers today and their abilities, not to mention technology and whatnot. I'd be very curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. And, that's where I think I've been really, really just lucky. And I don't say this, to go down a laundry list of where I've danced and who I've worked with, but let's say beginning with the New York City Ballet, I mean, to have both the repertoire of George Balanchine and Jerome Robbins, where Jerome Robbins was still alive. And I feel like that is what I'm speaking to in terms of Jerry's work, that he knew what ballet technique was about, but at the same time, he had that whole film and musical theater of modern day movements that he would bring into it. And so that's a great influence. And then you go to Ashton, who I'm a huge fan of, and then to more of the modern dance makers and so on. And I think that in a way, I feel that speaks to the American experience in general, but certainly the American dance experience. I'm not saying like just a mishmash. What I'm saying is that lives in me, and I'm thankful for it, because I do feel it really informs what I do, whether people think the work is good or not, but hopefully makes it something that's authentic either way.
A lot of productions have changed in the last 10 years to remove harmful cultural stereotypes from Act Two. So if you are creating a new version, how would you approach that?
Well, I think it was like the early or mid 90s. I was dancing in Zurich and became friends with an Asian American. And we were talking, this is maybe like 93, 94, about the Nutcracker and the various things. And I think maybe I was just like point blank, what are your feelings on the dance that many would have called at the time the Chinese dance, or tea?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget it. And he just looked at me and he said, well, in China, we just have a Caucasian do it. And I was like, that really kind of summed it up, in the sense of like, maybe this isn't so cool. And he did it in such an effective way, like, bringing the humor. But as we know, and humor, there's always truth, or at least a bit of truth. And that stuck with me. And from that point, then, I think that really then inspired me. And what's better than to really get people engaged is an experience then that doesn't offend them, but rather is relatable. And so I also think that creatively, if I ever did have the chance to make a brand new production of Nutcracker from scratch, is to reconceive it in a way that, again, is classical, but accessibly sophisticated.
Yeah.
Another one of my copywritten phrases there.
Okay.
No, but like accessible sophistication, that we want to keep what made it timeless in terms of the ballet technique and the virtuosity, but at the same time, like really think outside the box. I think there's ways to do it, and the score lends itself to that. A small example is at American Repertory Ballet. The first season I was here, I think the first week I was working here, actually, I decided to make a new dance that had been known as tea, or people had labeled, the Chinese dance. And I said, so listen to this without knowing anything or ever had any experiences or having seen the Nutcracker at all. And to me, it sounded like a bird song. And so then what I did was I made it into a dance that was a mama bird and some baby birds, so we could use some students from the school. And I found that quite exciting. Again, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of our ballet technique. It's a language.
Yeah.
But just like any language, it's how it's spoken, and how we speak today is not how they spoke hundreds of years ago. So why don't we put that into effect within the language of ballet specifically?
Yeah, I think for those divertissement in Act 2, as you said, you could use it as an opportunity to highlight and celebrate those cultures versus stereotype them and put them in that negative context, which in so many productions, it has been that. And I'm grateful to see so many have changed around the United States in particular.
No doubt. No doubt.
You've lived inside Nutcracker as a student, principal dancer, choreographer, and artistic director. At this point in your career, what is your relationship to the work, if at all?
I love going to the theater and seeing a production. I mean, obviously, I want to support the dancers that I work with currently and who I'm coaching and so on and so forth. So that's always nice to see them either grow into a role or continue to grow in a role that they've done for many, many years. And there is something magical when you're there in the theater and you kind of just turn off all the noise. Something that we haven't spoken about is just the music and the scores.
Yeah.
And that's where kind of quintessential, if you go back to your first question, quintessential and timeless, it's a major composition, and that shouldn't be overlooked either. So right now at this point, my involvement is one where I have just enough in terms of being able to keep the love and keep that genuine.
Yeah. I mean, the score has been, so many of my guests have talked about the score and the music. And I do think it is the thing that keeps this ballet relevant, because people are impacted positively when they hear this amazing score that Tchaikovsky has composed. Well, Ethan, I really appreciate your time and sharing your insights. I'm sure we could talk for another hour or so, but we'll keep it short today. So thanks so much for being on the show.
No, my pleasure. And thanks for your interest, and wishing you and yours and anyone tuning in happy and healthy holiday season.
Thanks. And of course, to you and your family, happy holidays as well.
Appreciate that. All right. Stay cool, man.
You too. If you liked our conversation here today, you can follow Company Secrets Podcast on all platforms and on our website, companysecretspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, because the stage is only part of the story.